And welcome back. We're starting to talk about gathering data, and one of the important things to consider is history. One of my wise old friends said that at work the problems never change, only the solutions, and if you've been working for multiple decades, you kind of see that. Now, one place I have in here, I've got this underlined because I've got a little story to tell you about that, about what has been tried in the past. Back before the days of Skype, there was something that came with Windows called NetMeeting, and it was horrible. This was version 1.0, and as well you know, you don't buy version 1.0 of anything. Well, what would happen is at our home office, some young engineer would get the bright idea, hey, we're going to hook everybody together with NetMeeting, and that way we can get rid of these $60,000 conference rooms that we have that's got all these fancy cameras and stuff. Well, they would try it with their neighbor in the next cubicle, and it would work like magic. So they would sit there and they would put out the special phones you needed for it. They'd send them down to us and they'd rag on us about the phones. Why don't you have these set up for yet? Why are you holding up progress, etc. and so on. Then he would set up the big meeting with the general manager and he was going to speak with all his managers through NetMeeting. And it would do two things. It would crash and it would burn. And I mean, it sounded like a bad Pink Floyd concert. Next thing you know, that engineer kind of dropped out of sight for a while, and then a few months later, another one tried the same thing. So it's important is finding out how long the problem's been going on, is finding out what's already been tried and why did it fail. You might be able to make it work by changing the approach a little bit, or if you ignore it, you may end up doing the same thing everybody else did. Okay, what solutions are available? When I say COTS, I'm not telling you to go take a nap. All that does is have a certain appeal. COTS stands for Commercial Off-the-Shelf Solution. Sometimes you have a problem that there's already a program written for. It may be a simple matter of just buying it rather than trying to grow your own. Now, when you have the presentation from your vendor on the COTS, because they'll be glad to come out and talk about it with you, if about halfway through people are already talking about how to modify it to meet their special needs, then it's no longer off the shelf and it's no longer COTS. Another solution that's available are scripting languages. We'll spend a few months together learning about those. You also have the formal application development languages that usually produce an exe file or something like that. That's always an option. Resources available. We were doing network work, so it's nice to have a test network. It's not a good idea to test on your production network because if it crashes and burns, everybody's sitting there patting their foot waiting for you to get it back up again. A lot of people borrow code from each other. We'll take a look at the legal aspects of that later on in this course. Every place has a subject matter expert, or a SME as we refer to them. If you have that one person who's really, really good in a language, you might want to go with that language because they can help you out with what you're trying to do. Okay, criteria we use to evaluate. You need to decide on that before you go out shopping, because otherwise you'll have the problem where you'll couch your problem in the terms of the solution you've already decided. Costs are always a consideration. Manpower is one that you consider how much manpower you're putting into the script with how much manpower you're going to save by the script. Complexity, the more complex a solution is, the easier it breaks. More often it's going to break. Sustainability, you might not mind burning the midnight oil and getting the script going. How much effort do you want to spend with continuing to upkeep it? Remembering that about 80% of the effort of a program is an upkeep. Don't fall for the delusion that I'll get this working and then it'll run forever. That's not what happens. Okay, desired features. When we talked about DISA compliance, we decided after we're in the project a while that we were content with having it where it would just mark the checklist with whether it was a finding or not a finding. We didn't really want the script to reset it to make it compliant. Okay, side by side, this is the data I gathered in the process of the decision. VB script, when I was starting out on this project, I need something to integrate with Active Directory. VB script is a Microsoft product, it does that well. I needed something that could read access databases. VBScript is a Microsoft product and it does that well. Needed to read Oracle databases. Oracle and Microsoft are bitter enemies, despite how much they may not make nice on the surface. VBScript can read an Oracle database. It takes a little effort to do it. The VBScript editor was free. I remember that after I've been scripting for a while, I had an engineer come swagger into my office saying, I need the same development tools you have. I told him you have it. It's called notepad.exe. And now they got it where there's a line number on it so you can tell what line number you're on. He left kind of unhappy. Local support. I have a coworker that I've been working with for decades, and we would swap VB scripts like people would swap recipes. Okay, PowerShell. Well, PowerShell is a spiritual heir to VB script. The application I needed to do, I needed to integrate with IIS, which is a Microsoft product. I needed to integrate with SQL Server, which was a Microsoft product, so PowerShell was kind of a natural selection. PowerShell has a free editor. In fact, it comes with the OS, and I had plenty of local support because the network engineer was doing the same thing I was doing. Okay, evaluate possible solutions. I'll drop down to the bottom line up front. As you can tell from my previous discussion, I selected VBScript and PowerShell over COTS or other solutions because they had the lowest cost. They essentially were free. They had the best integration because I have a Microsoft platform, and they had the best support because I have kind of a programming support group. Okay, for the possible solutions, you compare each of your solutions against your criteria. You select the best one, and the reason I say one you can live with, you may end up living with this for 10 or 15 years. Okay, now it comes time that you figured out what you want to do and you need to go convince your boss. Well, you need to lay out your reason, and you probably knew that, and you need to lay it out clearly and concisely, because the higher the boss, the shorter the attention span. Now, just as important as laying out your reasoning is have your work plan ready, because your boss is as concerned with can you get this job done as he is with is this the right decision. So you can have the best reason in the world, if you have no clue how you're going to implement it, his attention is going to start wandering and you've lost him. Okay, speaking of a work plan, then this is a scripting context. There's an old question and answer. The question goes, how long is a piece of string? The answer is as long as it needs to be. Work plan is the same idea. This is an informal statement of work. How complex it is depends on how complex you need it to be. Primarily audience is your boss. You need it so you can keep on track, and your boss needs it so he can determine that you're on track, because that's what he gets paid to do. Okay, main parts is a goal. You need to be able to put in one sentence what you're trying to do. Considerations, how much cost, how much manpower you want to put into it, what does it need to do. The strategy is where you take that and you go back down and break it into baby steps, and you put a due date on each of those. Okay, some tips in random order. Baby steps, I mentioned that's especially important for scripting context, because you don't have a lot of the fancy debuggers and all that you have with a regular application language with an IDE. Don't be afraid of fresh starts. If you're working in something like JavaScript and you have a pretty spectacular crash, close your browser out and all copies of it and open it again. We had a problem with a browser. We kept on hammering at it for a couple hours. We went and finally I got the guy to close his browser out, and what do you know, it worked just fine. Same thing with your workstation. If you have something that you're doing a lot of little things over and over again, like several 100,000 times, and all of a sudden your workstation gets where it's just bogging down and nothing's working, try a reboot. I had that experience too, where I couldn't get a script to work, and I rebooted, went and got a cup of coffee, and it worked just fine. Okay, keep the main thing the main thing. What I'm talking about there is keep in mind what your original goal was and accomplish your original goal. And if somebody wants to do something else, that's fine. The problem we have with a lot of IT projects, they end up drowning in their own ambitions. They get kind of sidetracked, and then the person loses track of the original objective. Okay, the 5 clicks of Google, that's just a technique. When you go to Google, don't go to the first site. Just what happens is if you take the wheel in the middle of the mouse and you click the first 5 hits and then compare those to each other, you'll get a sense of what the general consensus is of the solution to a problem. Okay, a script kiddie is somebody that gets a script from somebody else. They don't know how it works, they just know it works. If you do a script, especially for this course, it's important that you know everything it does. Why does it do what it does? What does all the little switches mean? Little options you add onto it, etc. Okay, be able to rebuild your workstation. A lot of application developers and scripters will sit there, they'll have their workstation set up just exactly the way they want it, and then one day they come in and something happens, and they have no idea how to get it back. We will now hear from an expert on this.
Fortunately, I keep my feathers numbered for just such an emergency.
Okay, that's not worth listening to again. Okay. Like Foghorn Leghorn, you need to keep your feathers numbered for just such an emergency, because you can go in at any time and a security upgrade will sit there and crash your system, and either it won't open at all, or you open it, you get ugly red X's. Know what special software you have on your workstation and what version. I had a developer somewhat dismissively tell me, go just get me the latest version when I was supposed to download a software for him. I did, and turned out it was a version ahead of what he had, and it wasn't working. Okay, deployment. Okay, I have a frowny face beside these first 2 notes because this is a sad experience. When you fail to plan, you plan to fail, and who needs to know? I had a database conversion program that I did a beautiful job of converting the data. Out of 750,000 records, I had 3 rejects when I finally converted. The problem is I didn't plan how to do anything after that. I didn't inform the users, I didn't train the users on there, I didn't plan for how to deployment, I didn't check to make sure that all the major programs and operations worked, and it was a real disaster. I had about 8 to 10 miserable months, and that's what happens when you have a bad deployment. You look forward to about 8 to 10 miserable months till you get it sorted out. Have a checklist for deployment. There's a lot of little things, but when you look back on it, it's a lot easier if you get a lot of these little things right. Have a separate folder for development and production script. There's nothing like starting to tweak a production script, and about 3 hours later you wish you can go back to where you were to start with, but you can't because you overwrote it. Have a rollback plan if your deployment fails. Have a real rollback plan. The idea that we're just going to fight through and make this work is not a plan. This is the voice of sad experience. Okay, Admiral Jaime Rickover is famous in the Navy nuclear propulsion program, and this is one of his favorite sayings. The devil is in the details, especially during a deployment. Okay, notice my note of manage life cycle. It will manage you if you don't manage this. The context on this is my VB script. These are the things that worked well as far as life cycle, and these are the things that work badly. Okay, the good news is I automated like 20 plus network chores. I had to take a leave of absence for a year and a half. It ran on autopilot. Reuse of code was an all-time high. My friend that I worked with for a number of years moved to a place up the street, another branch office, and I moved up there with him. And I went up there, I said, hey, can you include me on this automatic email? He said, sure. Uncomment your name, it's already in there because I got the script from you. Bad thing about that particular project was I was the single point of failure. I had kept on tweaking things, and finally the boss took me in his office and said, listen, you've got this where all this works really, really nicely, but you're the only one that knows how to do it, and none of us really have a chance at keeping it going if you're not in there to tweak it. The other thing is all good things come to an end to include scripting languages. VB script is on its way out. Between my friend and myself, we have like 50 plus VB scripts that we're using. Okay, some considerations for lifecycle. Keep track of your tools. They will announce before they become obsolete or deprecated. You need to keep track of that because they will probably, without fail, become deprecated eventually. VBScript is no longer being used, and it used to be our lifeblood. Try a 5-year planning horizon. Try to look 5 years out when you're anticipating your needs. That's just pretty standard in IT. If you got a transition, try to phase it in gradually if you can, because there are always some growing pains and all that. My friend and I have started converting our VB scripts, and we're still in the process of converting them, but we're well along the way. Okay, don't create a monster. This is my personal observation. Over time, in response to user requests, any programmer will program themselves into the corner. They will get to the point where they got so many band-aids and duct tape and all that on the program where it becomes just about unworkable, and then they retire and they bag you with a program. None of you are probably close to retirement, so that's not an option, so you need to keep the program where you can live with it. Okay, with that, we got everybody's favorite slide, and I will be talking with you later.